Hello everyone. So this video is going to be a time lapse of me testing out one of the first 6 pages of the paper that I made in the summertime. And this video obviously was created over the course of time because I made the paper itself, but then I actually recorded the footage that you're seeing right now the previous night from when I'm recording this. So a lot of different things went into making this video, and specifically this time lapse, and I figured since even sped up it's still quite a bit of footage, I should probably record some sort of narration for while I was doing it. But this drawing that I'm currently working on this piece of paper, which I can put a little thing for you to click on in the upper corner so that way you can see the video, if you missed it, of me actually creating this paper that you're seeing me sketch on. The reason why this video exists, why I'm making it, is twofold. First of all, I wanted to actually take this piece of paper to, I guess, its logical conclusion in the terms of a life cycle of a piece of paper that I would use. And it's been very difficult just having the stack of paper sitting there in my room and not use it for anything. I'm trying not to be too precious about them, but this is very momentous for me because it's the first time that I'm actually drawing on paper that I made. And I can't quite put into words how good that feels. But as I said, the purpose for this video is kind of twofold. It's to actually show me using the paper, and it's to test out and see what materials work well on this paper that I made and which materials don't work as well. So I'm not necessarily concerned with creating a masterwork. I'm just sort of drawing for fun, and I'm not drawing a character for once, which is unusual because that's most of what I do. I'm trying to be more open-minded and branch out into other forms of art. So yeah, this drawing is mainly going to be me testing different supplies, different materials, different tools on this paper to see what its capabilities are, to see what works well and what maybe I should probably try to avoid using in the future. So it was information gathering on one hand, but then second of all, it was a very fun experiment to do what I can only describe as a kind of stream of consciousness drawing. So you saw me start off with just my trusty Ticonderoga pencil, and now I've officially moved into easily my all-time favorite tool for making art, which is just a regular, I think it's just a Bic pen. I've told my friends about this and they all looked at me crazy, but it is true that I do think that just a very simple pen is probably one of my favorite art supplies to use. There's something about its simplicity and how easily it moves across the surface of the paper that I just don't get from anything else. And at least the pens that I have, that I use, they don't smudge super easily. They smudge every once in a while, but I would say for the most part they're pretty good about not smudging. So since I entered into this project with very little in terms of a plan, everything that you're going to see me do is just sort of off the cuff. And I was listening to a new album by an artist that I just found recently called Flock of Dimes, and I was just chilling, and it was, like I said, kind of just a stream of consciousness drawing. There wasn't planning put into it. This was a fun experiment because usually when it comes to character design, which is what I'm used to, there will be several little warm-up sketches to just sort of get my ideas out on the page, or to mess around with poses or things of that nature. But for this artwork, I'm really just going for it. And I used to do stuff like this all the time. When I used to make comics with my cousin and with my friends, we would just do it on notebook paper, and you kind of had to just work with whatever happened. And you would do something one time, and however it came out, that's just what you were left with. And that level of, I guess, free creative thinking isn't something I get to tap into. Usually there's a lot more structures involved, but this one was more akin to some of the Zen doodles that I did in high school, where I wouldn't go so far as to say you turn the brain off. I mean, even if I did say that, obviously that's hyperbole. It's more that you just keep putting down whatever idea pops into your mind next, and you don't fret about, well, practically anything. You kind of have ideas and then immediately put them down and not concern yourself with some of the finer details or the logic or the layouts or whatever. But here I'm just sort of messing around with my favorite tool, the pen, and as you'll see later on in this time lapse, I will go back and I will change things, I will add, I will layer things together. And at this point, I was trying to figure out what I was going to use next, and if I recall, I think it is probably the object or the thing I had the most trouble with, but I went for it, and I don't regret that. So what that is that I'm using right now is charcoal, and it is not a soft charcoal. I used this because it was in my art bag, and it is a hard charcoal. And since this is one of the 6 original pages that I made, those two things are not super compatible, because this piece of paper is extremely thin. Because if you watched the video of me making the paper, I explained that the first 6 pages are super thin because I wasn't using as much paper pulp as I should have been using, and the hard charcoal is pretty unforgiving, and you have to apply a lot of pressure to it in order for it to appear on the page. And so I was very cognizant that I was putting the paper in danger by pushing down as hard as I did, but I do appreciate the more smoky, diffused, lighter tones that I was able to get with this hard charcoal. And I didn't do any figure drawing or anything like that, but its shape does lend itself towards some very fun shapes just because of how you can hold it. It's one of the main takeaways that I had from art class or art classes that I've taken over the years, is you can do a lot of very interesting gestural things with charcoal. Just because of how it's shaped and how it fits in the hand, there's just a lot of options for how you can hold it in your hand and what all you can do. So here you can see that I'm kind of just messing around. I have the T, I have the E, and now I have the S, and I have a bunch of sort of spiraling flowery forms. And I think just about then is when I turn to, yep, that's the highlighter. So the highlighter, again, is just something that was in my bag, and I knew that I wanted to incorporate several different types of art supplies that I had just in my art bag, and specifically things that I haven't used in a long time. Because in the series of drawings that I'm working on currently, I tend to stay in a specific lane in terms of creation when it comes to the character art that I draw. It's the pen sketches initially, it's Ticonderoga pencil, and then the fine-tipped markers, and then colored pencil. And it's kind of just that on repeat for the character series that I've been working on for the past, 5-6 years. And it means that there are a lot of things that I have in my art bag that I just don't touch very often. So here, I finally move back to my Ticonderoga pencil, and I thought it would be a funny idea to, since it is a test page, to show visually the different items that I was using on the test page. So the first line's kind of faint, but it says pencil, and then I brought out my blue pen, and then here in a second I end up bringing out my red pen. And I did really like how my red pen looks on this sort of blue paper. It ended up looking really nice, so I'll have to keep that in mind for any future projects. There's the hard charcoal again. Again, very difficult to use. Even with the pointed edges of the charcoal stick, it was not easy to use. But I am glad that I did it, just so that way I know what the limitations are. I wish I'd been able to hunt down one of my pieces of soft charcoal so I could have got much more rich, darker black tones. But I guess between the pen and, here in a second, the fine-tipped marker, I'm pulling out, I think right about now, yeah, my trusty Papermate. I think the darker tones are more than accounted for. But yeah, I got the highlighter in there as well. And then very soon what I'll be doing is just going back over the whole artwork and adding things, adding layers, because I'm trying to show the true capabilities of each of these different utensils. And the benefit, of course, was that when I went back and looked after I was done with the time-lapse, and I turned the paper on its back, I was able to see what all bled through. And I still think it's a valid test, even though this piece of paper is much thinner than the other pieces of paper that I've made since the first 6. But like I said, I still think it's a very good test just to see what the strengths of the paper are, what the weaknesses are, and things of that nature. So I decided here to just add some fun little decorative flourishes wherever I could. I wanted to really lean into the visual noise of all the different art supplies, not necessarily vying for dominance, but just finding more ways of integrating them into each other. So here I'm sort of refining the simplified cartoon self-portrait I did of me just from the pencil into the fine-tipped marker, and just adding some little details to, again, just sort of layer one thing on top of another. This test page is also very interesting for another reason that will become very apparent very soon, at least I'm hoping, in the near future. I have an idea for an ongoing project that will probably take place after I am completely done doing the toy box dimension drawings that I've been doing in terms of character creation. I had a really cool idea that I can't wait to tell you guys about, but it's not ready yet, so... but it does involve some of these unsung heroes of my art bag that I don't use very often. It's an idea that I'm very excited about, that I think will be a lot of fun, and will also present a bit of a challenge for me, which the toy box dimension drawings have been a lot of fun, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they have stretched me a lot. And again, mainly that's because character creation is kind of my jam. That's where I thrive creatively. And so even though I'm doing 3 drawings a month, and I really do put a lot of effort into them, at the end of the day, I'm adapting childhood characters from action figures and drawing characters. And my brain has no problem drawing new characters or adapting old ones or things of that nature. So it's a challenge in the sense that it takes time and it takes effort, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it stretches me very much or it challenges me in any significant way. It's a lot of fun, but this idea that I have for a future project, I think will actually present a lot of very interesting challenges that I'm actually very interested in seeing how I'd manage them. So here I decided to color in the sort of block fields of some of these larger shapes that I made with the charcoal, since I figured that I could fill in larger amounts of it and not have a bunch of tiny little lines because of the fine tips of the pens or the marker. I just decided to try and fill in as much of those big spaces that I made, and then I figured that I would do one of my favorite things to do with charcoal, which is to just smudge with my finger. I find it very satisfying. I know some people have like textural problems where they can't bear the thought of rubbing their hand up against paper. I don't mind it, especially when I am smoothing out or changing the texture of charcoal. It's actually one of my favorite aspects of charcoal, which it's extremely messy and I'm not super good with it. But one aspect of it that I think is actually underlooked is the textural nature of smoothing things out or smearing the charcoal with the hands. Because at least for me, all of the projects that I did that for, there was just an extra layer of connection that I had to that drawing, since I don't know, there's just something about actually smudging it with your fingers, and you can still even see some fingerprints and things of that nature in the drawing. I don't know, it's just different. It's like one step closer to the art, I guess. Because with pen or pencil or things of that nature, you know, you're using an implement, you're using a tool to get the effect that you want. But with charcoal, you can really, get your hands dirty and shape how you want things to look and use a lot of intention to do so. And I find that very satisfying. So here I'm just going through, making some additions to those weird smoky looking vines, adding some details on the flowers, adding some leaves, and then of course going back over my little goofy cartoony self-portrait with pen, just to add in some fun little details here and there that the larger things just wouldn't be able to capture very well. But going back to what I was saying earlier, ultimately this artwork is about testing the limits of this paper that I made, but also giving myself the opportunity to do a kind of stream of consciousness drawing, which, like I said, I haven't done in a long time. I mentioned it earlier, but in high school I got way into doing Zen doodles, and I loved those a lot. I would go to this one coffee shop and I would study, and then as a sort of reward, I would sit down for, I don't know, sometimes hours and just do some complex Zen doodles. And in terms of why I enjoyed them so much, I think it's because the way that I did them, it was an equal balance between sort of random patterns, shapes, or things of that nature, but then there were also some things that I would have recur and repeat and sort of add an internal logic to the Zen doodle. So I guess in some ways I was probably Zen doodling incorrectly. But with this drawing, it was just about chasing every idea immediately. Not overthinking, not overplanning, just having fun, chasing ideas down. And I think here soon, I probably get the idea to add some more color in the forms of the red and the blue pens that up to this point I really only used for the little test segment in the bottom right. But after combing over some of the charcoal in pencil just to refine it a little bit, here it is. Here's the red pen. I mentioned it earlier and I'll say it again, but I really, really did like how the red showed up on this blue paper. I thought it pops in a really cool way. And this is about the time that I started getting the idea of what if I could simulate sort of visual glitches by adding in spontaneous patches of color in the forms of straight lines and squares. I basically just wanted to keep on layering one thing on top of another to let each of those art supplies shine, but then complement each other as well. I didn't want to leave any of them without a partner, I guess, if that makes sense. I wanted to make sure that they would complement each other, that they would talk to each other creatively, that even though it was one art supply or one tool or one pen or one pencil, whatever it was, that I could find some way of pairing that up with something else in a strange way. And, layering up the bright red pen with the very, very soft gray of the pencil of the Ticonderoga. Just a random idea that occurred to me that I went ahead and just did immediately. I didn't overthink it. I didn't do a lot of planning. I just hopped into it, and I'm very glad that I did. Like I said, I don't engage in this type of art very often, and I don't know, maybe it's just my brain justifies the fact that I was technically getting something done by doing a test page that allowed me to... I don't know, it sounds weird. It's not that I needed permission to just go crazy, but I was less concerned about the results since I knew ultimately the main purpose of this artwork is to test the different supplies. And so I guess I gave myself a pseudo safety net in that sense, that I wasn't creating this artwork for any other reason than to amplify or prop up the tools that I was using, and that was it. That was the main reason why I was doing it. So the focus is more on what I was using instead of what actually ended up being drawn, which, to be perfectly honest, I actually really like how this turned out. It's very random. There's a lot going on, but I tried to add a little bit of structure here and there, and who knows, at some point maybe I'll frame it for no other reason than it is a completely creatively driven drawing on paper that I made. And so it's like a double dip of coolness for me. I had a lot of fun making this. So here I'm just coming in and adding some blue shapes to the drawing, adding some blue fields to things, trying to make sure that I have a good balance of things. And yeah, the angle actually that you're watching this time lapse was very awkward for me to draw, because normally where my elbow and my hand and my arm are, usually when I draw, the paper is at a bit of an angle instead of it being straight in front of me, and then I have to keep my head back far away from the drawing. That's not how I normally do it at all. So it was very unnatural. So I guess that's another good reason, or a good thing, that I wasn't focused necessarily on creating something that looks really refined or really polished, because even down to the way that I was sitting in front of it, it didn't necessarily lend itself to that. But here, I'm just going back through on some final touches with the fine-tipped marker with my trusty Papermate, which these things, I love these things. I bought, last year I think it was, I bought a pack of these flares, I think they're called, along with a new packet of Ticonderoga pencils, because those things lasted me a long time. Like, the one that you see is one of the last ones that I have, and I had those for a long time. Like, they got me through a lot of high school drawings. So, when you find a brand that you like, that works for you, that's comfortable to use, that's durable, that you like how it interacts with your other art supplies, like, don't forget that. Like, make sure you use that. But yeah, here I wanted to just mess around with some of the aspects, the lighthouse, add in some random shading along that straight line, and here just adding in more shapes. This is something that I am heavily borrowing from Alphonse Mucha, is these random sort of shapes that have fun borders and have color fields in them, or there's just something going on with these shapes that sort of frame up the drawing in a cool way, where even if there's not an actual border to what you're doing, you can sort of fake a border by adding these random shapes and whatnot. And then I decided to just play around a little bit with the highlighter in the corner here, add yet another shape there. But yeah, here is kind of just the end result of the drawing, and overall I am quite happy with it. So I went ahead and signed it. Like I said, who knows, maybe at some point I'll frame this thing, but I was very happy with how it turned out. For all I know, I'll probably end up calling it Test, as simple as that is. But yes, I was very, very pleased with how this came out. I'm loving the new paper. I love all these random art supplies that I used. And yeah, so yeah, that's pretty much all I had for this video time lapse. Glad you guys watched it. And yeah, this is kind of like the victory lap of the whole making paper project. There was the vlog, there was the video of me actually doing the test, and now finally you get to see me use it. And I'll be using more of this paper for future projects for sure. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video, so thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.